This video is part 3 of the algebra review for geometry, factoring, and using the zero product property. So in number 1, 2, and 3, they're already in factored form, and we want to use the zero product property to solve for x. So what you do there is each set of parentheses gets set equal to 0. So we have x plus 7 equals 0 and 2x minus 3 equals 0. So in the first one, we can just switch our signs. So x equals -7. And in the second one, we can add 3 and then divide by 2. So x equals 3/2. Now, in number 2, there's also a number out front with a variable. So this also gets set equal to 0. So because there are 3 x's, we're going to have 3 solutions. So 3x equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0. So 3x equals 0, when you divide, we just get x equals 0. The other two, the faster way of solving, instead of showing all our work, we can just switch our signs because they're just x's. So we have x equals 1 and x equals -4. Now, in number 3, it's a little bit different because this is a 7. It doesn't have a variable with it. So that's not going to get set equal to 0. We're going to ignore it, and we're just going to set the other two equal to 0. So we just have 5x minus 4 equals 0 and x minus 10 equals 0. So to solve for x, we have 5x is equal to 4. When we divide by 5, we get x equals 4/5. The other one, all we have to do is switch our signs, so x equals +10. Now, when we get to factoring, we need to get those parentheses so that we can get x in our solutions. So first, what we're going to do is we want to make sure that it's set equal to 0. We want to make sure that the first term is just an x squared, nothing in front of it. So we're good so far. So now we want to figure out what are two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to 7. So think of numbers that multiply to 10. The first one that comes to mind is 2 and 5. 2 plus 5 is 7, so we know that those are our solutions. So we're going to then put that in parentheses to have our factored form. So we have x plus 5, parenthesis x plus 2, equals 0. Now, your order doesn't matter if you put x plus 2 first or x plus 5 first. Doesn't matter. So when I go to solve for x, I can just switch my signs. I don't even need to show the whole equation is equal to 5. I can just say x equals, switch my sign, so x equals -5 and x equals -2. We don't have to show the whole sign like we did above. If you want to, you can, but you don't necessarily have to. In number 5, we have x squared plus 5x minus 14. So now we want to multiply to -14 and we want to add to 5. Remember, when you're multiplying to a negative number, if you have two factors, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. If we are adding to a positive number, our bigger number is the one that's going to be positive. So two numbers that multiply to 14 are 2 and 7. In this case, because we're adding to the +5, 7 is going to be positive and -2 is going to be the negative number. So we would have x plus 7 times x minus 2 is equal to 0. When we go to switch our signs, so we get x is equal to -7 and x is equal to 2. Make sure when you're factoring, you show both steps. You show your factored form and you show your solutions at the end. In number 6, we have x squared minus 9x minus 36 equals 0. So we want two numbers that multiply to -36 and add to -9. So two numbers that multiply to 36 are 6 and 6, but I can't get that to multiply with the different signs and add to -9 because it would add to 0. So 4 and 9. Again, if I make one of those negative, that's not going to add to -9. What about 12 and 3? Well, 12 and 3 would add to -9 if 12 is negative and 3 is positive. So we would have x minus 12 times x plus 3 is equal to 0. When we switch our signs, x is 12 and x equals -3. In number 7, we have x squared minus 25 equals 0. Notice that there's no middle term there. So another way to rewrite this, we could say it's x squared minus 0x minus 25 is equal to 0. So what we're trying to do is find two numbers that multiply to negative 25 and add to 0. Well, the only way that the numbers are going to add to 0 is if they're the same number with different signs. Well, the factors of 25 are 5 and 5. So if we have one of each sign, that does add to 0. So we have 5 and negative 5. So we would have x plus 5 and x minus 5 is equal to 0. When we switch our signs, x is equal to negative 5 and x is equal to positive 5. Now, in number 8, we're not so lucky. It's not equal to, it's not starting with x squared, it's starting with 5x squared. So we need to factor out a GCF. So if I look at all three terms, what's the number they're all divisible by, which is 5. So that's going to be my GCF. So I'm going to put that out front, and I'm going to divide everything by 5. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now we can factor that part in parentheses like we've been doing. So we need two numbers that multiply to 3 and add to negative 4. So if you're multiplying to a positive and adding to a negative, we need two negative numbers. So we have negative 3 and negative 1. So in our parentheses, we have 5 times x minus 3 times x minus 1 is equal to 0. When we go to solve for x, we can ignore that 5 because it doesn't have a variable with it. So we're only going to have two solutions for x. So x is 3 and x is 1. So in number 9, we have x cubed, x squared, and an x. We don't usually have that. We usually have x squared, x, and a number. So our GCF here is going to be x, so that we can decrease each of those exponents. So we get x squared minus 9x minus 22 is equal to 0. So we need two numbers that multiply to negative 22 and add to negative 9. So we're looking for one of each sign. So we can have negative 11 and positive 2. So we have x times x minus 11 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. Now, this time we have three terms with an x. So in the first one, there's nothing to solve, so x is just 0. In the other two, when we solve, we switch our signs, so x is 11 and x equals negative 2. In number 10, we have to do both parts for our GCF because we want it to become x squared, and it's right now a 2x cubed. So each thing needs to be decreased by an x and divided by a 2. So 2x is our GCF, and we're left with x squared minus 3x minus 40 is equal to 0. So we need two numbers that multiply to negative 40 and add to negative 3. We want one of each sign. So we're going to have negative 8 and positive 5. So 2x times x minus 8 times x plus 5 is equal to 0. When we do zero product property, remember 2x equals 0, but when we divide 0 divided by anything is just 0. So our first is x equals 0. When we switch the other two signs, we get x equals 8 and x equals negative 5. Now, in number 11, it is not set equal to 0. So first thing we have to do is subtract 18 from both sides. 2x or x squared plus 3x minus 18 is equal to 0. We want to find two numbers that multiply to negative 18 and add to 3. So that's going to be 6 and negative 3. So we have x plus 6 times x minus 3 is equal to 0. When we switch our signs, x is equal to negative 6 and x is equal to positive 3. In number 12, we need to subtract 4x squared from both sides, and we need to subtract 20 from both sides. So we get x squared plus 8x minus 20 is equal to 0. We want two numbers that multiply to negative 20 and add to 8. So 4 and 5 are not going to work. Two other numbers, though, are 10 and negative 2. So we have x plus 10 and x minus 2 is equal to 0. When we switch our signs, we get x is negative 10 and x is 2.